Okay. Well, on the topic of the food crisis, the question about agriculture, resource management, and green policy. We attended a congressional hearing on the renewable fuel standard, which is the ethanol mandate, where a White House official was being grilled about at what point can that mandate be lifted, as it is quite obviously having a direct impact on the food supply. To which the committee didn't receive an answer. The representative pressed the official on whether or not there is some sort of standard, some kind of a bottom or a baseline for the production of the people and for the agriculture, by which you would determine that the mandate needs to be lifted. To which the official answered, no, there's not. There isn't any such thing, such that when push comes to shove, as it stands right now, there is no protection for the people from starvation. From a direct shortage of food. It's being diverted to the ethanol. Now that's apparent, that's very visible. But there's another aspect, I think, which isn't so visible, which amounts to my thinking as a salting of the earth kind of policy. You see, corn is quite an intense biological process in terms of the biogenic migration of atoms, what actually happens in the growing of the corn. And we have had, historically very fertile topsoil across the nation, but we've been depleting that resource at an accelerating rate, running our crops based on a market value. What's going to get the money? Now, over time, especially in the lower latitudes, the ability to have a bountiful harvest becomes less and less. That's just based on the fertility of the topsoils. That doesn't take into account things like extreme weather, pests, plant diseases, blight, these kinds of things. So we're on the cusp of not only sacrificing ourselves today in the name of the markets instead of feeding the people, we're also sacrificing our posterity in that, in essence, we're burning through our soils. Now, along with this, we have the case, for example, in Iowa, where they were digging a well for water for agricultural uses. And instead of the normal depth of 150 to 300 feet where they would usually strike water, they had to go down to 900 feet, and they weren't very successful even at that depth. So the attempted wells in this case were abandoned. Now, the groundwater complexes in that area, are complex, but and the nearby wells are doing okay. But the farmers, the drilling companies, geologists are very concerned about the fact that there was one young farmer who was having a well drilled for a hog raising complex. He couldn't find sufficient water, even drilling to that depth, so he canceled his plans altogether. And a few other hog companies have had their existing wells go dry. Some farmers have had to resort to hauling in water. Another had to use a farm lake that he had built previously. But now keep in mind here, this isn't out west where it's arid and very dry. This is well east of the 20-inch rainfall line. So we have the capability in principle of dealing with these problems. We can, in the case of soil, we can re-enrich the farmland, but that's not necessarily a profitable thing to do for a Monsanto or a Cargill, and it does go directly against the policy of population reduction which is in play right now. On the water question, we have NWAPA to address that crisis. We could go to nuclear desalination to get fresh water if we choose. So in principle, these aren't crises which are out of the power of mankind to address. The real crisis seems to be more that the empire is out to kill us. So if you could address this problem.
Well, in terms of all kinds of normal response to a disaster in these areas, in tropical areas, if you're just going to do that, you're going to fail. You're going to have to actually go back to a deeper approach. We're going to have to change. First of all, the first thing we're going to have to do, because of the deprivation, we're going to have to cancel all conversion of food into fuel. All food into fuel ends. That's the first thing, and if you don't do that, you are not serious. And anyone who doesn't do that is a criminal, morally a criminal. So therefore, we're going to shut down the foolish people. That's what we have to do. Now, we also have a deeper problem. what you say when you talk about all this deep well stuff, what you're talking about is the fact that the stupidity, the criminality has been underway for the better part of a century. Since the 1970s, and especially since the 1980s, the late 1980s, and the entry of George H.W. Bush into the presidency, and then later his two sons into the presidency twice, and now this bum, Obama, you think how long a period that is. 4 years each term. And it's over that span that the resources of the United States, which were then rich in these categories, are almost non-existent now. So we're not going to be able to get out there with a good old pump and pump up the water that's needed. There's not enough. But there are other methods we can apply. And they imply technologies which are available to us. We can do it. But it means we've got to get away from the green technology. What is going to kill Americans is green technology. As long as the greenies are triumphant in raping the economy and destroying it, destroying productivity, then we don't have a chance. You're doomed. But then what's the green technology? Where'd the green come from? Well, I know where it came from. I know the names of the people who created it. And they were all criminals. I followed that since, again, for almost 50 years of how this policy was put into place. And for 50 years, we've been destroying the world, or a good part of it. So now what we're going to have to do is simply throw these bums and their policies out. It's a national emergency. That's what it is for the United States. We have to make some radical changes quickly to get people moving upward. In other words, you cannot just try to put a few drops of water down a deep, dry well. You've got to generate some growth in the water. Well, that we can do. But it means we have to sacrifice some of this damn green foolishness to do it. We also have to employ people in productive labor, not foolish make work, or these kinds of things. We've come to the point that the United States has been ruined, actually I could say ruined since the assassination of what? Of John F. Kennedy. The United States has actually been on a decline since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the long war that we got into, which is totally unnecessary, totally contrary to all principle. Douglas MacArthur, probably the greatest genius military genius of our century, or our past century, warned against this. We understood Truman was no damn good. That's a fact. But what we did is we put up with him, and we went to a thermonuclear option. It was firstly a nuclear weapons. We dropped nuclear weapons on Japan, both cases. Neither should have been done. Japan had already been defeated. The dropping of those nuclear bombs had no effect on winning the war, but quite the contrary. So we have been moving in directions, including unnecessary wars. Wars which are not wars. You can no longer fight wars in conventional wars. If anyone's thinking about going to a world war now, they are clinically insane or clinically dead because they don't know what they're doing. The only kind of a war, we're now in a thermonuclear conflict syndrome. If we try to push any kind of warfare, as in the Middle East region, as now, say, the Syria situation, if you try to push that to the point that the Israelis get stupid and get into that kind of operation, or anything like that, if we go to a nuclear crisis, it will be a thermonuclear crisis. And all leading experts in the military department know that. But what is happening? This administration in the United States is pushing in that direction. The British are doing it more obviously. We have some people like Dempsey and so forth who are warned us against this nonsense. But we are not far from the threat of going to thermonuclear war. And thermonuclear war lasts for about 1 hour and a half. And a lot is over.
Well, that brings us to a conclusion of the questions that we have for tonight. I think Mr. LaRouche's forecasting record, as you said, has been made very clear over the last almost 50 years. So what he said tonight, I think, needs to be taken very seriously by everybody who heard. So I would like to thank Leandra. I would like to thank Dennis for joining me in the studio tonight. I'd like to thank you, Lynn, for what you said. And I'd like to thank everybody who was watching. Good night.